The sky above Davin's moon wept with ash. Horus Lupercal, Warmaster of the Imperium, stood upon the embarkation deck of the Vengeful Spirit and gazed through the viewing port at the world below. Once, 6 decades past, this satellite had been a realm of verdant forests and sprawling meadowlands, a place of simple tribal warriors who bent knee to the Emperor's truth. He remembered it clearly. The campaigns, the compliance, the oaths sworn. He remembered Eugen Temba, the man he had trusted, the man he had personally appointed as planetary governor. Now Erebus, first chaplain of the Wordbearers, stood beside him with news of betrayal. The crimson-armored priest spoke with measured reverence, his words carefully chosen, each syllable weighted with meaning. Temba had turned from the light of the Imperium, Erebus said. He had fled to the moon with his garrison, abandoning his post, forsaking his oaths. The insult burned through Horus like Prometheum fire. He had given Temba that world. He had placed faith in a mortal man and been repaid with treachery. The Mournival stood in attendance, Ezekiel Abaddon, Tarek Torgadon, Horus Aximand, and Garviel Loken. They watched their Primarch, saw the fury kindle in his eyes, felt the temperature of the chamber rise with his anger. This was not the contemplative Warmaster who weighed every decision with strategic precision. This was a father betrayed, a lord insulted, a warrior whose pride demanded satisfaction. Behind them, Loken felt unease coil in his gut. Something about this felt orchestrated, too neat, too convenient. Erebus had arrived with his warning at precisely the right moment, had delivered his message with just enough deference to sting Horus's honor. But the Warmaster had already given his command. They would descend to the moon. They would make an example of treachery. The fleet broke orbit and the sons of Horus prepared for war. The stormbirds descended through clouds that churned with unnatural darkness. The moon below had transformed into a vision from nightmare. Where forests once stood, now spread endless swamps of putrid water, the color of infected wounds. The air tasted of rot and despair, thick with spores that clung to armor and helm filters. Entire graveyards of Imperial Army soldiers lay half submerged in the muck, their bodies swollen with decay, their uniforms tattered and stained. Loken stood in the drop pod bay, mag-locked to the deck as the descent began. Around him, his brothers checked their weapons, recited battle oaths, prepared their souls for the righteous slaughter to come. But this place felt wrong. The Vox channels crackled with interference, voices bleeding through from nowhere, whispers in languages that predated humanity's first words. Torgadon moved beside him, his usually jovial demeanor subdued. Even Tarek, who could find humor in the heart of a void battle, seemed troubled by the corruption below. The drop pods struck the surface with thunderous impact, and the sons of Horus emerged into a realm of endless twilight. The swamp stretched in all directions, broken only by the distant silhouette of a fallen starship. The glory of Terra, Temba's flagship, its hull half consumed by the pestilent earth. A homing beacon still pulsed from its wreckage, a lonely heartbeat in the darkness. They advanced through the mire, bolters raised, scanning for threats. The dead greeted them first. Corpses dragged themselves from the swamp, animated by energies that defied comprehension. They had been Imperial Army once, loyal soldiers of the Warmaster. But corruption had claimed them utterly. Bloated flesh hung from their bones, eyes glazed with disease, mouths working soundlessly as they lurched forward. The sons of Horus met them with fury. Bolter rounds tore through rotting bodies. Flamers scoured the dead back into their graves. Chain swords roared as they bit into corrupted flesh. But for every corpse destroyed, 2 more clawed their way from the swamp. The moon itself seemed to birth them, an endless tide of plague-ridden horror. Horus fought at the vanguard, his lightning claws carving through the undead with contemptuous ease. He was a god of war, made manifest, each movement precise, each strike lethal. His sons rallied to his presence, drew strength from his certainty, pushed deeper toward the crashed vessel. But Loken saw what others missed. The Warmaster's movements held a recklessness, a fury that clouded tactical judgment. Horus fought as though seeking to drown his doubts in violence, to prove something to himself and the galaxy. The betrayal of Temba had wounded him in ways a blade never could. The glory of Terra loomed above them, a cathedral of twisted metal and corroded ceramite. Its hull had split open during the crash, revealing corridors that wept with moisture and decay. The beacon pulsed from somewhere within, calling them deeper, promising answers. Horus ordered the assault. Companies of Astartes poured into the wreckage, clearing room by room, corridor by corridor. The dead fought them at every turn, mindless and relentless, pouring from ventilation shafts and collapsed bulkheads. The ship itself seemed alive, groaning and shifting, as though attempting to trap the intruders within its rotting bulk. Then the structure lurched. Ancient metal screamed as the vessel settled deeper into the swamp, internal supports collapsing under stress never meant to be borne. Bulkheads slammed shut, separating squads, cutting off communication. In the chaos, Horus found himself alone. The Warmaster continued forward. If his sons could not follow, he would finish this himself. Pride would not allow retreat. Pride would not allow doubt. The corridors narrowed, walls pressing close, air thick with the stench of decay. Every surface crawled with corruption, fungi that pulsed like diseased organs, slime that hissed where it touched ceramite, flies that swarmed in clouds dense enough to obscure visibility. Horus pushed through it all, his gene-enhanced physiology filtering out toxins that would kill a mortal instantly. The dead came for him in waves. They clawed at his armor, clutched at his legs, sought to drag him down through sheer weight of numbers. He destroyed them without thought, without mercy, his claws flashing in the darkness like lightning in a storm. He was the Emperor's son, the chosen Warmaster, and nothing born of this corruption could stand before him. The bridge of the glory of Terra opened before him like a throat. The command throne sat at its center, and Eugen Temba had become a monument to decay, his body swollen to grotesque proportions, flesh splitting to reveal organs that pulsed with unnatural life. Flies formed a living shroud around him, their buzzing a hymn to corruption. His uniform still clung to portions of his body, rank insignia barely visible beneath layers of filth. But Temba's eyes retained a terrible awareness. He recognized Horus. He smiled. The greeting came in a voice that bubbled and wheezed, words struggling through fluid-filled lungs. Temba welcomed his lord to this new realm, spoke of transformation and rebirth, of gifts bestowed by powers that truly appreciated loyalty. He blamed Horus for abandoning him, for leaving him to rot on this worthless moon, while the Great Crusade moved on to glory. The bitterness poured from him like pus from a wound. Horus felt only disgust. This thing wearing Temba's face was an abomination. He had come for justice. The duel began without ceremony. Temba rose from his throne with ponderous grace, his bulk belying his speed. In his hands he carried a sword, blade of napped flint set in a golden hilt, primitive and crude, yet radiating power that made the air shimmer. The anatheme, a weapon of the warp, forged in malice, consecrated in suffering. Horus attacked with the fury that had conquered a galaxy. His lightning claws blazed with power, each strike capable of splitting tanks, each blow delivered with Primarch strength. Temba met him with unexpected skill, the plague-ridden monstrosity moving with coordination that should have been impossible. The daemon blessing him granted abilities beyond mortal comprehension. They fought across the bridge, two giants locked in brutal combat. Horus's claws raked deep furrows in Temba's flesh, but the wounds closed as quickly as they opened, filled with writhing corruption. And Temba's blade carved through the air, each swing carrying death in its wake. The Warmaster dodged, parried, struck back with increased ferocity. But Horus fought with anger, not clarity. His mind churned with thoughts of betrayal, of responsibility, of the weight that pressed upon him since accepting the Warmaster's title. The careful tactical genius that had won 1,000 campaigns abandoned him in favor of raw emotion. Temba pressed his advantage. The corrupted governor spoke between blows, his words designed to wound deeper than any blade. He spoke of being forgotten, of loyal service rewarded with exile, of watching the crusade move on while he rotted in obscurity. Each accusation found its mark, resonating with Horus's own buried fears. The Warmaster's guard dropped for a fraction of a heartbeat. In that instant, Temba struck. The anatheme plunged into Horus's shoulder, piercing ceramite and transhuman flesh with contemptuous ease. The blade sank deep, and with it came poison beyond mortal understanding. Chaos-tainted venom flooded into the Warmaster's body, corrupting his enhanced biology, turning his own defenses against him. Horus roared in pain and fury. His claws flashed, and Temba's head separated from his bloated body. The corpse collapsed, releasing clouds of flies that filled the bridge. But the damage was done. The Warmaster staggered, clutching the wound, feeling fire spread through his veins. His sons found him moments later, alerted by his cry. They burst onto the bridge to find their lord wounded, Temba's headless corpse leaking corruption across the deck. Abaddon reached Horus first, supporting his Primarch's weight, horror written across his features. This should not be possible. Primarchs did not fall to wounds. They were beyond such weakness. Loken examined the injury and felt cold dread settle in his heart. The smell of rot emanated from it, and Horus's enhanced metabolism seemed powerless against the corruption. The Warmaster's skin burned with fever. His breathing labored, his pupils dilated with pain. They carried him from that cursed place. Fighting through the remaining dead, Torgadon paced like a caged beast. Loken watched them all and felt the bonds of brotherhood beginning to strain. Erebus arrived with an offer. The word-bearer spoke with solemn certainty. The tribes of Davin possessed ancient knowledge, healing arts that predated imperial understanding. The Temple of the Serpent Lodge had saved lives when all other methods failed. It was their only chance. Time was running out. Loken objected immediately. Forbidden practices had no place in the Imperium. The Emperor had banned such rituals for good reason. To subject their lord to these arts would be to betray everything they stood for. But Abaddon saw only salvation. Aximand, torn between duty and desperation, sided with his brother. Torgadon hesitated, caught between loyalty to Loken and love for his Primarch. In the end, only Loken stood against the decision, and his voice was not enough. They took Horus to Davin's surface, to the Temple of the Serpent Lodge that sat at the heart of the tribal lands. The structure loomed against the sky, carved from dark stone, its entrance framed by twin serpents that writhed in eternal embrace. The Tree of Lies grew above the doorway, its branches hung with offerings that rattled in the wind like bones. The priests welcomed them. They wore robes of green and bronze, faces hidden behind masks that depicted serpents with knowing eyes. They spoke in the old tongue, languages that had predated the Imperium's coming, words that resonated with power beyond comprehension. The ceremony chamber lay deep within the temple, a vast space lit by braziers that burned with sickly green flame. At its center rested a stone altar, ancient beyond measure, its surface stained with substances best left unnamed. The priests placed Horus upon it, his massive form dwarfing the structure, yet somehow fitting, as though designed for exactly this purpose. Erebus directed the ritual with practiced authority. He moved among the priests, speaking their language, performing rites that made even Abaddon uncomfortable. A priestess approached, blade gleaming in the firelight, and with practiced precision opened Erebus's throat. Blood poured forth, channeled into grooves carved into the altar, flowing in patterns that formed symbols recognizable from no human culture. The word-bearer's blood fed the ritual, and power gathered in the chamber. The air thickened, reality thinned, and the boundary between material universe and immaterium grew translucent. Horus's body convulsed, his soul torn from dying flesh, cast into the endless sea of the warp. In that realm of pure thought and emotion, where daemons danced and gods fought their eternal wars, Horus Lupercal found himself standing upon an endless plain. The ground beneath his feet felt solid, yet shifted with each step. Reality malleable, responding to thought and will. Shapes moved in the distance, vast and terrible, too large to comprehend, too alien to name. A figure approached through the chaos, familiar and beloved. Hastur Sejanus, first captain of the Luna Wolves, dead these many months, walked toward his lord with arms outstretched. His smile carried the warmth Horus remembered, his presence offering comfort in this realm of madness. The Warmaster embraced his son, felt solid flesh beneath his hands, heard words of reassurance spoken in tones long silenced. Sejanus offered to guide him, to show him truths the Emperor had hidden, to reveal the destiny that awaited if Horus possessed the courage to claim it. They walked through visions of past and future. Sejanus showed him the Emperor's laboratory, the place where Primarchs were forged. Horus watched his younger self, saw his brothers gestating in their tanks, witnessed the moment chaos stole them away. He saw the Emperor's face as the Primarchs vanished, saw something terrible in that expression, calculation rather than grief, as though the theft had been anticipated, perhaps even desired. The vision shifted, time flowing like water. The Great Crusade spread across the galaxy, worlds burning in its wake, entire civilizations erased because they did not conform to imperial truth. Horus saw the cost of compliance, the oceans of blood required to build his father's empire. He saw himself as the instrument of genocide, the weapon wielded without question. Then Sejanus showed him the future, the 41st millennium, 10,000 years hence. The Imperium stood triumphant. Humanity spread across 1,000,000 worlds, but transformed beyond recognition. The imperial truth had been abandoned. In its place rose a religion that worshipped the emperor as a god. Statues towered above cities, depicting the master of mankind in divine glory. Beside him stood 8 Primarchs, honored as saints, venerated by billions. Horus searched the statues and found himself absent. His name went unspoken. His deeds had been erased. The galaxy he conquered remembered him not at all. Sejanus spoke of the Emperor's true plan, how the master of mankind had used his sons to build an empire, then discarded them when their usefulness ended. The Emperor sought godhood, Sejanus said, and would sacrifice anyone to achieve it. The Primarchs were tools, nothing more, destined to be cast aside when the work was complete. Fury kindled in Horus's hearts. He had conquered galaxies in his father's name. He had bled, fought, sacrificed everything for the Imperium. And this was his reward? To be forgotten? To be erased from history as though he had never existed? But doubt gnawed at the edges of his anger. Something felt wrong about this place, about these visions. Sejanus spoke truths, yet something in his voice rang false. The Warmaster pulled away, studying the figure before him with new eyes. The facade cracked. Sejanus flickered, and beneath the beloved face lurked something else. Crimson armor, a cold smile, eyes that held knowledge of horrors beyond mortal comprehension. Erebus stood revealed, his disguise shattered. Before Horus could react, shapes materialized from the warp stuff surrounding them. Custodian guards, the Emperor's elite protectors, manifested in golden armor with weapons raised. 6 of them charged, spears blazing with power, intent on destroying the intruder in their master's domain. Horus fought on instinct. His warped form granted the same terrible strength his physical body possessed. He shattered guardians, scattered their essence, fought with the fury of a Primarch betrayed. But even as he battled, confusion reigned. Why would the custodians attack him? Unless the Emperor had already marked him for death? Unless his father had decided to eliminate a son who knew too much? A howl split the air, and wolves poured from the chaos. They were massive, their fur crackling with psychic energy. their eyes blazing with intelligence beyond mortal beasts. They fell upon the remaining custodians, driving them back, clearing space around Horus. The largest wolf approached, its form shifting, expanding, reshaping itself into something humanoid. Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, stood before his brother in spirit form, his single eye blazing with desperate urgency. Magnus spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other in his haste. This was a trap, he said. Erebus sought to corrupt Horus, to turn him against the Emperor. The visions were lies, or at best half-truths, twisted to serve dark purposes. The word-bearer served powers that desired nothing less than the Imperium's destruction. Erebus responded with cold mockery. He gestured, and reality bent to his will, showing Horus yet more visions. The Emperor leaving the Great Crusade to pursue secret works on Terra. The Council of Terra making decisions without consulting the Warmaster. The Imperium restructuring itself, peacetime roles assigned to those who had never earned them through conquest. Magnus countered each vision with explanations, with context, with desperate attempts to make his brother understand. But his words carried a fatal flaw. He spoke as a psyker, as one who wielded the very powers the Emperor had forbidden. Magnus stood in the warp itself, having violated the Edict of Nicaea, having broken the Emperor's direct command. Horus felt his trust fracture. Magnus offered truth, but came cloaked in disobedience. Erebus offered lies, but at least admitted his methods were questionable. The Warmaster stood between them, between truth and deception, between loyalty and ambition, and found no certainty in either direction. Erebus pressed his advantage. He spoke of power without limit, of respect that could never be taken away, of a place in history that no one could erase. The gods of the warp offered partnership, not servitude. They offered elevation to greatness beyond anything the Emperor could provide. All Horus needed to do was reach out and take what was rightfully his. Magnus pleaded with increasing desperation. His brother had to resist, had to see through the manipulation. The fate of the Imperium hung in balance. If Horus fell, countless billions would die. The Great Crusade would end not in enlightenment, but in darkness. The Warmaster stood at the crossroads of destiny, and the weight of that moment stretched into eternity. He saw paths branching before him, one leading to forgotten obscurity, the other to eternal glory. One demanded continued obedience to a father who had used and discarded him. The other offered power to shape his own fate. Horus Lupercal, beloved son of the Emperor, master strategist, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, made his choice. He reached out not toward Magnus, but toward Erebus. He accepted what the word-bearer offered, knowing it was poison, knowing it was damnation, but unable to surrender his pride, unwilling to fade into history's shadow. The warp convulsed. Power flooded into him, dark and ancient, burning away weakness, replacing his dying flesh with something stronger, something terrible. 4 voices spoke in unison, gods older than humanity, and they sealed their pact with the Warmaster in that moment. Horus belonged to them now, body and soul. a weapon forged in the crucible of betrayal. Magnus recoiled in horror, understanding too late that he had failed. His brother was lost, transformed by forces beyond redemption. The Crimson King retreated, his spirit fleeing back to Prospero, knowing that the galaxy would never be the same. Erebus smiled in triumph. The plan had succeeded beyond even his expectations. The Warmaster had fallen, and with him would fall the Imperium itself. In the temple of the Serpent Lodge, Horus's body convulsed one final time, then lay still. For a moment, the watching Astartes feared their lord was dead. The priests maintained their chanting, their ritual reaching crescendo, power flowing through the chamber in waves that made reality tremble. Then Horus opened his eyes. He rose from the altar with fluid grace, his wound already healing, flesh knitting closed, strength returning in a flood of renewed vitality. The sons of Horus rejoiced, their prayers answered, their Primarch returned from death's threshold. They saw only what they wished to see, their lord restored, their faith rewarded. Loken saw something different. In the Warmaster's eyes lurked a change, subtle but profound. The warmth had cooled, replaced by calculation. The nobility had hardened into something colder, more ruthless. This was Horus, yet not Horus. A familiar face concealing a transformed soul. The Warmaster embraced his sons, spoke words of reassurance, promised that all would be well. But his gaze found Loken and held it. And in that moment, the captain understood with terrible clarity that nothing would ever be well again. They returned to the fleet, to celebrations and relief, to a future that would burn brighter and darker than any could imagine. The sons of Horus had saved their lord, never knowing they had damned themselves in the process. Erebus watched from the shadows, his work complete. The serpent had struck at the heart of the Imperium, and its venom would spread unchecked. The heresy would begin. On Terra, in the depths of his palace, the Emperor paused in his great work. Something had shifted in the warp, a disturbance that rippled through the immaterium like blood spreading in water. He turned his awareness outward, seeking the source, and for a moment his sight touched Davin. The master of mankind saw what had been done, understood the magnitude of the betrayal, and felt something that might have been grief, or might have been fury, or might have been the terrible resignation of one who had foreseen this moment, but lacked the power to prevent it. The Emperor returned to his work. The Webway project demanded his attention. Humanity's future demanded his sacrifice. If one son had fallen, others remained. If the Imperium faced darkness, it would face it as it always had, with fire and faith and the absolute conviction that humanity would endure. But in the depths of that golden mind, in chambers of thought too vast for mortals to comprehend, the Emperor began calculations for a war he had always known would come. Brother against brother, son against father, the dream ending not in triumph, but in tragedy. The serpent had emerged from beneath, and the Imperium would never be the same. In the years to come, Historians would mark this as the moment, the fulcrum upon which fate turned. A single wound, a single choice, a single betrayal that cascaded into catastrophe beyond measure. Worlds would burn, legions would shatter. The very fabric of reality would tear under the weight of the conflict to come. But none of that had happened yet. For now, Horus stood aboard his flagship, surrounded by his devoted sons, returned from death and transformed by power beyond their under. The serpent had struck, and its poison would spread across the stars, consuming all it touched, turning the Emperor's dream into a nightmare of blood and darkness. The heresy had begun, though few recognized it yet. The loyal would become traitors, the certain would embrace doubt, and the galaxy would learn that even the mightiest could fall. And in the shadows, in the spaces between thought and reality, 4 dark gods watched and laughed, pleased with what they had wrought, satisfied that their greatest game had finally begun. Horus was theirs now, the first piece moved in a contest that would reshape the universe itself. The Warmaster returned to his duties, began planning his next campaigns, spoke of continuing the Great Crusade with renewed vigor. His sons believed him, trusted him, followed him as they always had. Only a few saw the changes, sensed the darkness growing, understood that something fundamental had broken. Loken stood at a viewing port, staring at the stars, feeling the future press against him like a weight. Torgadon joined him in silence, and together they watched the void. 2 brothers who understood that the unity they cherished was fragmenting, that choices would soon be demanded of them, choices no warrior should ever face. The serpent had emerged from beneath the surface of loyalty, and its coils would strangle everything they held dear. This was the truth that Davin revealed, that even the greatest could be corrupted, that even the beloved could betray, that even the Imperium itself could fall. But the full horror of that truth remained hidden, waiting in the shadows of days to come, growing in power and darkness, preparing to consume the galaxy in flames. For now, there was only a wounded Primarch healed, a crisis averted, a celebration of survival. The serpent's work was done. The poison spread unseen, and the Imperium stumbled forward toward its destiny, blind to the doom that walked among them, wearing a familiar face, speaking beloved words, leading them all toward the abyss. In the ages to come, they would remember this moment, not as a triumph, but as the beginning of the end, the day the Warmaster fell and took the galaxy with him, the hour when hope died and heresy was born, the instant when the Serpent Beneath struck and poisoned the very heart of the Imperium itself. And in that distant future, when mankind huddled in darkness and prayed to a god emperor who could not answer, when the Imperium festered in the rot of 10,000 years of decay, when the dream of enlightenment had curdled into nightmare, they would look back at this moment and understand the terrible price of pride, the crushing cost of betrayal, the enduring weight of choices made in darkness and pain. But that understanding would come too late, as all wisdom does, bought with oceans of blood and mountains of corpses, paid for by the death of hope itself. The serpent had struck, and its venom would never be cleansed. Not in 10,000 years, not in all eternity. This was the truth of Davin. This was the lesson of the Serpent Lodge. This was the moment the galaxy broke, and nothing would ever heal it. And still, the Warmaster smiled. The silence that followed his awakening carried its own weight, heavy as ceramite, cold as the void between stars. Horus walked the corridors of the vengeful spirit, and where he passed, his sons fell to their knees in gratitude and reverence. They wept openly, these transhuman warriors who had known no fear, who had conquered worlds without hesitation. They wept because their father had returned from death itself, and in their relief, they failed to see what Loken saw. The subtle wrongness in the Warmaster's gait, the calculating coldness behind eyes that had once burned with fraternal warmth. The celebrations lasted 3 days. The remembrancers composed odes to the Warmaster's resurrection, their words flowing with mythic grandeur, already transforming recent events into legend. The iterators prepared speeches proclaiming this miracle as proof of the Imperium's invincibility, evidence that not even death could claim the Emperor's chosen son. Throughout the fleet, from the lowest deck rating to the highest-ranking officer, joy spread like wildfire, burning away the fear that had gripped them all. Only the Mournival understood how close they had come to catastrophe. They gathered in their private chamber, that sacred space where brotherhood had been forged across years of shared bloodshed and triumph. The 4 of them sat in silence, each processing what had occurred in their own way. Abaddon spoke first, his voice carrying uncharacteristic uncertainty. The first captain had been the most vocal advocate for the Serpent Lodge ritual, had overruled Loken's objections with the fury of desperation. Now, doubt gnawed at him, though pride would never let him voice it directly. He spoke instead of practical concerns. How long before the Emperor learned what they had done? Whether the forbidden arts would leave traces that Imperial scrutiny might detect. Aximand, called Little Horus for his resemblance to their Primarch, sat hunched forward, his face buried in his hands. He had sided with Abaddon in the crucial moment, had helped carry their dying lord to that cursed temple. The weight of that choice pressed upon him, and he wondered aloud if they had betrayed everything the Legion stood for in their desperate attempt to preserve it. Torgadon attempted levity, as was his nature, but his jokes fell flat, his usual humor unable to penetrate the darkness that had settled over them. He had been torn between brothers, between Loken's warnings and Abaddon's certainty, and in the end, had chosen to trust in the Warmaster's survival above all else. Now, he asked questions no one could answer. What price had they paid for that survival? What debt had been incurred in the shadows of the Serpent Lodge? Loken remained silent, his gaze fixed on nothing, his mind replaying every moment from the decision to descend to Davin's moon until this present hour. He had sensed Erebus's manipulation from the beginning, had felt the trap closing around them with each step, yet had lacked the authority to prevent it. The word-bearer had played upon Horus's pride with masterful precision, had orchestrated events with such careful attention to detail that even warning of the trap had been insufficient to avoid it. The captain spoke at last, his voice low and measured, each word chosen with care. He told his brothers what he had seen in the Warmaster's eyes upon awakening, the fundamental change that lurked beneath the familiar features. Something had been taken from Horus in that temple, he said, and something else had been given in return. What they had saved might bear their Lord's face, but whether it still contained his soul remained an open question. Abaddon erupted in fury, his denial violent and immediate. The first captain would not hear such doubts, could not accept that their desperate gamble might have cost them everything. He accused Loken of faithlessness, of allowing fear to corrupt his judgment, of betraying the trust the Warmaster had placed in him. The argument that followed revealed cracks in the Mournival's unity that had been invisible before Davin. Words were spoken that could never be taken back, accusations made that poisoned the bonds of brotherhood. When Abaddon finally stormed from the chamber, Aximand followed, torn between loyalty to different brothers, choosing in the end to stand with the first captain. Torgodon remained, his usual smile completely absent, replaced by an expression of profound loss. He looked at Loken with something approaching grief, understanding that their fellowship, forged across decades, tempered in the fires of countless battles, was fragmenting before their eyes. He tried to speak, to find words that might bridge the growing divide, but ultimately could only grip Loken's shoulder in silent acknowledgement before departing. Alone in the chamber, Garviel Loken felt the future pressing against him with suffocating weight. He had been chosen for the Mournival because of his honesty, his unwillingness to compromise truth for convenience. That same quality now isolated him, marked him as different from brothers who desperately needed to believe their choice had been correct. Elsewhere in the fleet, Erebus knelt in meditation within his personal sanctum. The word-bearer's throat had healed completely, the ritual wound closing without scar, without trace. Before him, candles, arranged in precise geometric patterns, cast shadows that moved contrary to natural law, forming shapes and symbols drawn from knowledge forbidden to mortals. The first chaplain spoke prayers in the ancient tongue, words of power that resonated through dimensions beyond the material. He gave thanks to the primordial truth, to the gods of the warp who had granted him vision and purpose. The corruption of Horus represented merely the first step in a plan that stretched across years, a conspiracy that would reshape the galaxy itself. Lorgar had sent him for this purpose. The Urizen, whose faith had been rejected by the Emperor, whose perfect cities had been razed as punishment for worshipping the Master of mankind as divine. That rejection had opened Lorgar's eyes to greater truths, had revealed powers that welcomed worship rather than forbidding it. The word-bearers had embraced those powers in secret, had prepared for decades, and now their patience would be rewarded. Horus would be their instrument, their weapon aimed at the heart of the false Imperium. Through him, they would tear down the Emperor's lie, would reveal the truth of divinity to a galaxy that had been deceived for too long. Through him, the gods of the warp would reclaim reality itself. Erebus smiled in the darkness, his features illuminated by candlelight that cast no natural shadows. The Warmaster belonged to chaos now, whether he fully understood it or not. The seed had been planted, and it would grow inexorably, spreading its roots through the Legiones Astartes, corrupting the Emperor's finest works, turning his own sons against him. The galaxy would burn, and from its ashes would rise a new order, an honest order that acknowledged the gods rather than denying them. This was the vision that sustained Erebus, the dream that justified every betrayal, every manipulation, every soul sacrificed to achieve it. In his quarters, Horus stood before a mirror, studying his reflection with eyes that saw more than they had before. The wound on his shoulder had vanished entirely, leaving flesh unblemished and perfect. But deeper changes had occurred, alterations to his very essence that transcended physical healing. He could feel them now, the gods of the warp, their presence pressing against his consciousness like distant thunder, like the promise of storms yet to come. They whispered to him in moments of stillness, showed him visions of futures possible and probable, offered power beyond anything his father had granted. The Warmaster remembered his fever dream, remembered the visions Erebus had shown him, and knew with terrible certainty that much of it had been truth. The Emperor had used his sons, had built an empire on their sacrifice, and had begun discarding them the moment peace seemed achievable. Magnus had been right to attempt intervention, but wrong about whether the corruption could be resisted. Horus had made his choice in full knowledge of its cost, had embraced damnation because the alternative, fading into obscurity, becoming a footnote in his father's story, was worse than any hell the warp could offer. Better to burn bright and be remembered than to flicker and die unnoticed. He would continue playing his role, would maintain the facade of loyal Warmaster while preparing for the true work to come. His legion would follow him, as they always had. Other legions would join once he showed them the truth. Once they understood how the Emperor had betrayed them all, the Imperium would fall, and from its ruins they would build something greater, something honest. The Warmaster smiled at his reflection, and the expression held nothing of brotherhood, nothing of the warmth that had once defined Horus Lupercal. This was the smile of ambition unbound, of pride transformed into weapon, of love curdled into hate. The serpent had not merely struck, it had replaced its victim entirely, wearing his skin, speaking with his voice, leading his sons toward darkness, while they believed they followed him toward light. And the galaxy, unknowing, stumbled forward into nightmare,